Welcome back to the channel, fellow chess players. Today we are tackling an opening theme, specifically the topic of opening traps. Any self-respecting chess player knows that generally traps don't work, or rather, they only work against beginners or those who don't know the refutation. Today, however, I will try to mention some traps to you. Let's say some of those that are considered traps, but in reality, all things considered, they also have an interesting value. Let's say they aren't actually that wrong. I've selected 5 for this first episode, and let's see these 5 traps that have the goal, in quotation marks, of tricking the opponent, but in some way, in reality, even against a prepared opponent, they aren't even that bad. The first one I'll show you is actually one of my favorites, which is the Danish Gambit. The Danish Gambit is a gambit played after e4, e5, d4, pawn takes c3. So this pawn is sacrificed. Naturally, now I want to recapture with the e-pawn and create this central support. So black accepts the gambit by taking this pawn. Here the Danish Gambit starts with the move bishop c4. So white sacrifices a second pawn. Pawn takes, bishop takes. Now I will also show you the variant, the correct variant. All things considered, however, even with the correct variant, white is not doing badly, and this position, I tell you, is very, very dangerous. For example, you see that, well, black struggles a bit to develop pieces because they develop the knight, hop, the move e5 arrives, they make the move d6, and here I develop very quickly. And watch out, moves like that lose instantly, right? Classic trick, bishop takes f7, knight e5 check, and then you take the bishop. Watch out, the pawn is pinned, eh? It can't capture because otherwise I take the queen. So, in any case, on a practical level, this position is very difficult for black. Think about the fact that the main line here is to play d5, meaning black voluntarily gives back a pawn in this way, which I can assure you is not obvious for a beginner to have to play d5 here to defend themselves. Look at how beautiful the main line is. Bishop takes d5. Now the line is knight f6, and it would seem that white has a trick available. Bishop takes f7, a deflection sacrifice. Obviously, we are opening up an attack on the queen on d8. If the queen takes, we take the queen, obviously gaining the most important piece. However, the line isn't over because the line is actually correct and continues with bishop b4 check, an intermediate discovered check. At this point, I am forced to move the queen back. The bishop takes, the knight takes, and incredibly, after a whole series of, let's say, very, very absurd complications, the position is equal with equal pawns. However, I tell you that I don't mind white's position because in any case, having the central pawns is, in my opinion, a good advantage. If black isn't careful, these central pawns will give them a lot of trouble. So, in my opinion, the Danish Gambit is very interesting because even with correct play, as you can see, all things considered, the position reached is very good. If the opponent makes a mistake, I don't know, let's make a few normal moves. Knight c6 develops a piece, develops another piece, and white immediately gets their king to safety, and as you can see, everything is untouchable, right? I can never play knight takes a4, both rook e1 and, well, actually it is already winning, but naturally bishop takes f7 and queen d5 check is even stronger. But if you do not want to calculate anything, just play rook d1 and rook e1, and it is obviously already winning. And so black here has to be very careful. They have to put the bishop on e7, but white takes space. Look at how active white is. Look at how active white is. Black has to start placing their pieces in strange ways. Here, for example, I can already play knight g5 going to take this. White's initiative is very interesting. For example, after castling short, the only move here is f4. Look at how white is strangling black. What do we do? Do we move the bishop? f5? Look at what's about to happen here. So, actually, this Danish Gambit isn't particularly evil because with correct play, the position is more or less equal anyway, but with incorrect play from black, white really does have several prospects. Speaking of another variation, still on e4, e5, let's move on to the second gambit, to the second playable trick, the very famous Italian Gambit. I've already brought it to you on the channel in several videos. I must say it's actually interesting because this is the Italian Gambit. Let's put it back. But I repeat, you can find the videos with the theory from this point of view. Here, knight g5, and here black must be very good at not making a very common mistake. Here the common mistake is to play knight e5. This move here is deeply wrong because I managed to complete the idea that we will see shortly. Queen h5 check, so I basically go and recapture the piece here. And the problem with this position is that black, now I'll show you the correspondence with the correct variation. Black in this variation has a dead knight on g8 and therefore will potentially go on to lose more material immediately. In the main line, however, it is played this way. Knight h6, knight takes f7, knight takes f7, bishop takes f7, and you basically get the exact same position. But as you can see, the knight on c6 is obviously much more useful than the knight on g8, defending the pawn on d4, and here are the two variations. In my opinion, the strongest variation, and the computer agrees, is the move d5. I'll spare you the theory. There are videos, you can go watch them. Many people here don't know the move d5 and play the move d6, which is equally playable, but as I've shown you in numerous examples, this is a very comfortable position for white. Comfortable doesn't mean one for white, it just means comfortable, period. So let's see instead, let's switch to black. Let's switch to black because I'll show you two interesting perspectives against d4, two gambits that, let's say, are highly publicized because of their tricks, but are actually very playable. The first one is the Albin counter gambit. So here, this variation with e5. So white leaves this pawn on e5 in prize and then d4. And here is the trick of the Albin counter gambit. What is the trick? White is naturally annoyed. This pawn here is annoying. So they would try to get rid of it. They want to play e3. White's dream, of course, is to reach this position where they trade queens, make black lose the right to castle, and then naturally recapture the pawn. In this case, white would be a pawn up and would obviously also have the advantage with their king because black can no longer castle while white can. But this is where the trick happens. And the trick is this bishop to b4 check, so I force a piece to interpose on the d2 square, and at this point the intermediate d takes e3. Now one might say, but how? But the bishop is hanging, I'll just take the bishop. And f2 intermediate. At this point, I cannot take the pawn because this time the queen is hanging and there is no discovered check. So I have to try to move the king here, and here comes the real trick, which is pawn takes knight check. So let's say we need to do something somehow, and if you take the knight, obviously bishop g4 comes and we lose the queen. So let's say the trick itself is interesting, but the Albin counter gambit, I'll show you the main line, is actually not bad at all. Knight f3 is the main line, knight to c6, and now g3. There are several ways to play here with white and with black, sorry. There is the Morozevich variation, which is a relatively modern variation, in which black simply plays knight to e7, then knight g6, and tries to recapture this pawn. In my opinion, let's say the classic idea of the Albin at lower levels isn't bad. That is playing with bishop g4 and then playing with queen d7 and long castling. Short castling, long castling. Let's say that black has sacrificed this pawn, but now let's say they will try to develop an attack on the opponent's king. In my opinion, from a practical point of view, it's very interesting. I've played many games, even when I was younger, with this variation, honestly getting excellent results. And let's look at the other gambit against d4, which is none other than the Budapest gambit. So black seems to sacrifice a pawn. In reality, this pawn is recaptured. The gambit all in all is sound. And generally, white, I tell you, would do better, in my opinion, to play at their best against the Budapest gambit. They can simply ignore the fact that the pawn is hanging and give the pawn back, and this position is playable. However, I'll show you the trick. Let's say here we pretend that white defends with knight f3. I attack with knight to c6. At bishop f4, it continues to defend, and here comes bishop b4 check, making white's pieces poorly placed. Queen e7, so I am going straight to recover the pawn, and rightly now white wants to trick me because they play a3 with the idea maybe that if I start moving the bishop, obviously pawns will come at me, right? And so here the trick is knight takes e5, so I take back the pawn. Obviously the trick is that the bishop cannot be captured because there is knight d3 checkmate. That said, trick aside, so let's pretend that white after knight takes plays correctly, so knight takes, and here they don't get checkmated and play with e3. Here, honestly, black's position isn't bad because black can continue with bishop takes d2, or actually they can also continue with bishop c5. In doubt, I would continue with this and then d6 with the classic play against the light squares, right? Bishop to e6, we pressure the pawn, so actually it's still a gambit, but in my opinion, it's quite playable from this point of view. And we conclude with the last one, which I'm not sure we can really call a trick because it's a very respectable variation. It's the fried liver attack, which we keep calling the fried liver because I don't want to complicate your life. In fact, today we are actually looking at the fried liver, perhaps for the first time. Bishop to c4, knight to f6, knight to g5. Here, I have naturally shown you the main defensive variation for black in several videos, which is d5. Naturally, there are no other ways to defend this pawn here, so d5, pawn takes. And here many make this mistake, that is they play knight takes d5, allowing white to enter the actual fried liver attack. In this position, one of the moves, I have shown you two different moves. I have made videos for both the variation that Carlsen recently played with b5 and the variation considered the main one with knight to a5. For those who don't want to waste time with nomenclature, let's call this the main variation of the fried liver attack. For those who love nomenclature, it's the Polario variation. Keep calling it the fried liver, please, because I don't want you to complicate your lives with names. That said, let's look at this fried liver, shall we? So knight takes d5, knight takes f7, then king takes queen f3 check. So now I want to go and recapture the knight on d5. So white, black, if they don't want to simply lose material in one move, must put the king on e6. I renew the threat and now black must defend with knight b4. What is the key to white's position? Here we don't recapture, meaning there isn't a tactical sequence where we win the piece back in 2 or 3 moves, no. Here, the game for white is played in this manner. Castling short because even with a piece down, we will now try to exploit the fact that the king is in the center. So we bring the king to safety, but above all, the rook into play. Black obviously continues with c6 to give more security to the knight on d5, and we now open the position with d4. So we are not necessarily playing to win back the piece immediately. We are playing for the aggressive positioning of our pieces against the opponent's king. And mind you, we are in a dynamic position, so if black plays queen b6, we do not trade queens, queen e2, and we pose all the problems again. Black has the king here, think about it. The correct move here is king e7, with the king ending up in front of the bishop. I don't know if it's that easy to play in this position. Then again, it's still the same white advantage, so let's say this variation is actually one of the best among the various tricks we are usually taught as children. Well, so in this episode, we did something a bit different, an episode for both beginners and intermediates who want to try some tricks. But I urge you to try these. Don't try those that only really work if the opponent makes a mistake. Stafford Gambit, I'm talking directly to you. Well, I hope you enjoyed this episode. As always, if you want to support the channel, I invite you to subscribe, leave a like and a tactical positional comment, and I look forward to seeing you all in the next videos.